In 1453, Byzantium was a decaying but symbolically powerful remnant whose name still commanded reverence across Christendom. Constantinople sat astride the Bosporus, guarding the sea route between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, and sheltering the gilded dome of Hagia Sophia. Its location made it a prize of both commerce and faith. The city's bulwark was the Theodosian Walls, the monumental 5th century fortification raised under Theodosius II around 412 to 413, a layered system of outer moat, formidable outer wall, inner curtain wall, and countless towers that had repelled invaders for a millennium. Politically and economically, the empire was fragile. After the Fourth Crusade in 1204 and centuries of territorial erosion, the Palaeologan realm had been reduced to the city itself with small outlying holdings in the Morea and Trebizond, and its population had dwindled to an estimated 50,000 to 70,000, strained by blockades, falling trade, and fiscal insolvency. Constantine XI Palaiologos, crowned in 1449, faced depleted coffers, a thin field army, and fractious alliances with Venice and Genoa. Rising across the straits stood an ascendant Ottoman state under Mehmed II, who became Sultan in 1451 and was determined to seize Constantinople to secure imperial dominance. That collision between a storied capital and an audacious young conqueror set the stage for a cataclysmic showdown. Mehmed II moved with imperial purpose. After becoming Sultan in 1451, he set about preparing to end Byzantium. By early April 1453, he had assembled a vast force. Modern estimates put his army at roughly 80,000 to 100,000 men, supported by a powerful fleet to blockade the Bosporus and the Golden Horn. In 1452, he ordered the construction of ReelHistory on the European shore to choke Constantinople's sea lifeline, and the previous winter he contracted Orban, a Transylvanian cannon founder, to cast monstrous bombards. Orban's great cannon, hauled into position in March 1453, was meant to batter the ancient Theodosian Walls. Maybe clicking subscribe would have saved them. Mehmed did not rely on brute force alone. Engineers built earthworks, siege mounds, and timber revetments, dug trenches and organized artillery platforms, and a guarded ring of forward posts to sustain a prolonged siege. Logistics were ruthless and meticulous. Supply depots, supply lines, and a standing corps of sappers were all prepared to undermine the curtain walls. Constantine XI Palaiologos, crowned in 1449, answered with austere resolve. Inside the walls, a ragged but devoted garrison of roughly 7,000 soldiers, sailors, and armed citizens held the lines, reinforced by Genoese volunteers under Giovanni Giustiniani Longo and a small Venetian contingent. The city's population swelled with clerics and refugees. Constantine sent urgent pleas to Pope Nicholas V and to Western courts for a crusade, but any relief was thin and belated. On April 6, 1453, Mehmed's tents mushroomed before the landward walls and a formal siege began. Raids and probing assaults tested weak stretches while the Ottoman fleet tightened its maritime cordon. Over the following weeks, both sides measured steel and will, each move escalating toward the decisive blows to come. From early April, the Ottoman grip closed inexorably, and each deliberate measure chipped at Constantinople's ancient defenses. Orban's prodigious bombard, cast in the winter of 1452 and already roaring from Ottoman platforms, along with a battery of lighter cannon, hammered the Theodosian walls day after day, splintering masonry and opening hairline fractures that sappers could exploit. Ottoman engineers dug mines and galleries, erected timber siege towers and earthworks, and perfected counter-battery positions while disciplined detachments maintained an unbroken ring around the landward curtain. The decisive gambit came on April 22, 1453, when Mehmed's men hauled dozens of ships over the Galata Heights and launched them into the Golden Horn, a feat that neutralized Byzantine naval advantage and sealed the maritime approaches between the Bosporus and the Horn. Inside the walls, Giovanni Giustiniani Longo and Emperor Constantine XI organized spirited sorties and countermining, but those attacks could not undo the steady attrition. Food stocks dwindled, grain and salted meat ran low, wells and cisterns were strained, and refugees crowded churches and public squares. Plague and scurvy lurked in the packed alleys. Civic councils quarreled over grudging rations, and appeals to Pope Nicholas V and Western courts produced words and promises but no timely crusade. Venetian and Genoese merchants weighed profit against peril and offered limited naval aid, yet no relief army appeared. Morale frayed as watchers reported new breaches and weakened towers. Some soldiers petitioned to negotiate, city clerics urged prayer, and Constantine refused to surrender. By late May, the bombardment had widened multiple focal points along the land wall. Miners probed the foundations, and both besieger and besieged prepared for the reckoning that would come on May 29, 1453. On the morning of May 29, 1453, after weeks of bombardment and relentless sapping, the Ottoman assault crystallized into a brutal, organized onslaught against the Theodosian Walls. Repeated breaches, battered open by Orban's mighty bombard and backed by a battery of lighter cannon, left jagged rents in the ancient masonry. Miners and engineers widened the gaps and pushed scaling ladders and siege frames into place. Sultan Mehmed II concentrated the Janissaries and the imperial household troops on the weakest sectors, while Sipahi and Anatolian levies kept pressure along the curtain. Elite bands, disciplined and fanatical, poured through every opening as volleys of arrows and arquebus fire stitched the air. Byzantine defenders, led by Constantine XI Palaiologos and the resolute Genoese captain Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, launched furious counterattacks, hurling stones, boiling pitch, and making desperate sallies to seal breaches and buy time. Giustiniani was gravely wounded in the flanking fight and taken to Galata, a loss that shattered discipline at a crucial moment. Constantine personally rallied the remaining detachments, sword flashing beneath the gilded dome of Hagia Sophia, refusing offers to flee and driving men back onto the walls in a final valiant stand. Despite heroic resistance, the weight of numbers and the multiplicity of breaches overwhelmed the defenders. Towers fell, gates were forced, and cohesive command broke into isolated pockets. By late afternoon, the organized defense had collapsed. Ottoman standards streamed over shattered parapets, disciplined units swarmed the streets, and the imperial line of defense ceased to exist. Constantine XI fought to the end and perished in the melee, and the city's last orderly resistance ended, clearing the way for the calamitous climax that sealed Byzantium's fate. On the afternoon and into the evening of May 29, 1453, the siege that had begun in April reached its decisive conclusion as Ottoman columns poured through multiple breaches in the Theodosian Walls and swarmed into Constantinople. Janissaries, Sipahis, and irregulars flooded the streets, banners unfurled, and the city's ordered defenses dissolved into desperate skirmishes in alleys and squares. Byzantine bastions were seized, towers toppled, and gates forced. Contemporary witnesses reported that Constantine XI Palaiologos died fighting in the melee. He vanished in the carnage, and his body was never conclusively identified, making his last stand the final royal act of the Roman Empire. Looting and slaughter followed, as was common in late medieval sieges, until Sultan Mehmed II entered the city that night to restore discipline and assert imperial authority. He then moved to the great basilica of Hagia Sophia. Its seizure that night, with its altar stripped and its sacred space taken over, became the unmistakable symbol that Byzantium's thousand-year imperial order had ended. The fall of Constantinople on May 29, 1453 closed one era and opened a new age under Ottoman rule. After the climactic fall on May 29, 1453, Mehmed II's conquest propelled the Ottoman state into a dominant Mediterranean power. By securing the Bosporus, the Sea of Marmara, and the grain and silk routes that had sustained Constantinople, the Ottomans gained control of key land and sea corridors. That disruption of traditional east-west trade helped push Western Europe to seek new maritime paths, fueling voyages of exploration like Columbus in 1492 and Vasco da Gama in 1498. Greek scholars and manuscripts fleeing the ruined capital streamed into Italy and the West, accelerating humanist learning and feeding the Renaissance. Orban's giant bombard and the siege's artillery doctrine confirmed gunpowder as the decisive instrument of siegecraft, reshaping warfare. Religious, cultural, and commercial orders were reordered across Europe and the Near East. What older identities were truly extinguished, and what new world did their ashes make possible?